Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Great. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to introduce our wonderful guests here, and they're going to do a little bit of a reading each, and then we'll get into a discussion about some themes and questions in their work. Paige Cooper is the author of many short stories, recently brought together in her debut collection Solitude, published by Biblioasis, which has been longlisted for the 2018 Giller Prize, and is a shortlisted finalist for the Governor General's Award for English Language Fiction. Paige's work in Solitude is defiantly strange and near impossible to describe. A fantastical montage of fever dreams, magnetically intimate and alienating by turns. Each story feels like entering a strange new world that begs to be carefully decoded. These are stories that drift in and out of dreams, that involve time machine encounters with other selves, stories that begin in the middle of ongoing conflicts and make philosophical pronouncements as cryptic as they are provocative. Kathy Page is the author of 8 books, most recently Dear Evelyn, also published by Biblioasis, which is a finalist for the 2018 Rogers Writers' Trust Fiction Prize. Her books Paradise and Elsewhere and The Two of Us were both nominated for the Giller. Kathy's work in Dear Evelyn is characterized by a committed patience, a deep love of intimate details, and a staggering honesty with respect to love. There's a remarkable breadth of perspective on the lifelong marriage of the central characters that throws the smallest moments into sharp focus, meditating on all the complications of love, the joy and sadness, the connection and distance, the thoughtfulness and conflict. Please welcome our guests, Paige Cooper and Kathy Page. Thanks. Paige, do you want to kick things off here?
Hi. So I'm going to read from a story called Retirement, which is a story that took many drafts because it's about my hometown, and I was worried that I wouldn't ever be able to show my face there again, but it seems like it turned out okay. All you really need to know about this story is that the narrator is a ski racer who has recently kind of dark horsed the Olympic gold, which is actually a thing that happened to my neighbor, which is again why I maybe shouldn't go back to Canmore. And this is from the middle of the story. It was easy after Turin. The media loved me and Claire. The media loved my dead mom. Claire puts out energy like a white sun, newborn. No one doubts her smile. She spends 3 weeks every year training little girls to wipe out without crying. She looks like loss would slide off her. Loss would evaporate from her skin and sparkle in the air around her. She'll be great on the speaking circuit. I've never seen her read anything besides comedian memoirs. I didn't ever win anything again. I was back at the top of mid-pack. I never had an exit strategy. I had nowhere else to go besides home. When I booked a ticket here in the middle of Val de Fiemme a month ago, Claire shoved my half-packed duffel off the bed and snarled, "What the fuck was the point then?" The trail up Grotto Canyon starts wide and graveled, graciously coasting along the creek. A red and black runner dashes me like a deer, then a woman pushing a muddy yellow hiking stroller. The child behind the plastic windshield is bloated pink, face streaming with liquids. It creels toothlessly past me, conveyed helpless as an oracle harvested from its cave. I may as well be carrying a parasol. My beers are too heavy for their shitty plastic bag. Even my sweat is pathetic, drippy. There'd always been a lot of parties. International organizations hosted galas. The ones the sponsors threw were better. Claire and the girls would appear in the hotel lobby in black dresses that draped clavicles and taut trapezius lines. Lipstick and earrings transfigured them from the grim projectiles furled up in the starting blocks. Still, compared to the other guests, All of us were the same unmistakable animal, ludicrous with goggle tans, windburned, raw. We'd smile and talk to women too elegant for muscle, men who'd jiggle if they fucked. Even people our age, a skinny guy carrying a platter of stemware would hack a smoker's lungful into his elbow. What would the girl behind the bar look like naked? A nice girl who drank to get drunk, who thought of food in terms of likes and dislikes, who had time to go to college. We circulated, said our bromides, smiled. White cloth tables were spread with what amounted to installation pieces. 1 glass of wine, 2 max. We were not expected to be thoughtful. Rich men giggled when I bummed a smoke on the balcony. They looked over my shoulder for the coaches. Very glamorous, one drawled approvingly. Do I make you want to buy something? I said. Down jacket? Travel insurance? They made me wear my gold medal around my neck over my tuxedo. Everyone kept giggling. The nicotine made me nauseous. The taste of the cigarette in my mouth was like my mother. They were supposed to envy me. When I came home, the whole town was decked out for me. Penny Archambault, the big realtor, gave me a card that read in giant blue script, "Congratulations, Evan Harms, Olympic gold medalist, tour in 2006. I made out with a lot of girls in that car using psychological tricks I'd picked up from Infinite Jest. Claire was in Peru. She'd assumed I'd go with her. I took too long to tell her I didn't care about Machu Picchu, and so that whole period was radio silence between us. We'd been together since we were, 17? If she wasn't sleeping around down there, I don't know what she was doing. All I had to do was look anguished and tell a girl about how desperately, eternally in love with Claire I was, and simultaneously how terrifying it was to be so overwhelmed by this new girl's eyes, mouth, kindness, beauty, etc. And I'd get comforted and blown, and the girl, a Quebecoise or Australian working the ski hills, an American tourist, someone's cousin from the UK, would go home silent and superior, post-dramatic, tasked with the sacred charge of keeping our secret. The air in the canyon is dry with juniper. Rock breaks through the packed dirt of the path like spined mammals surfacing. The creek gushes clearer over pink-flecked, black-glossed boulders pooling neck-deep, then roiling onward. Sticks gather in eddies, but no moss or algae. Everything is holy and clean. The canyon closes overhead, cool as a crypt beneath the peak's basilica. The sublime is fractal. Start with the quartz sparkle in wet stone and zoom out to the bitter cliffs shadowed in a sliver of sun. Zoom out to the ruined peak whose gash you're clambering up. Zoom out to the vertebral range, then the valley's mandible, 100 billion beauties, none of them attainable, though they are valueless. The only thing this place exports besides athletes is wedding photographers and watercolorists. Tourists come here to gawk, and we despise them, but we can't comprehend this place either. Gaping out the window as your vehicle speeds past on the highway isn't improved by doing it 20 times a day for 2 decades, because either way, one day you'll see the familiar stony visages on a screen in an airport, and they will be man-made, glassy, with a Banks monogram in the corner. All you can ever do is wrap the world in a circle around yourself and look at it. 200 meters ahead, where the canyon jags right, rocks engulf the woman and her yellow stroller. Newborn boulders grind themselves down to teeth as they churn over each other. The noise is delayed, amplified, repeated. I hear it in stutters. I sprint. As I sprint, I'm afraid that the rock slide is going to fill the canyon, yet I am sprinting towards it. The boulders remap the creek in a fog of dust and spray. The yellow stroller is upside down in there, wheels mangled. The churn rolls over itself. The stroller drops again. I fear the baby is dead. I can't see the woman. I clamber across the living rift. The water is ice melt. The rocks hack my shins. They are the size of vehicles, of household appliances. They've stopped, and as I step onto them, they move again. The baby is shrieking. The stroller rests, half submerged in icy water. Plastic windshield intact. The baby is slung from its straps, blotched red but unbloody, fat arms kicking and splashing. How did the stroller float so leafily along over the crush? I'm afraid the baby is hurt in a way that I'll hurt it worse. I have to move it. I unhook it. I hold its hot, sopping weight. I strain to see the woman. Is he okay? Shouts a man. "There's a woman in there," I say. The wailing grates. The runner is fumbling a phone. I look up the slide's chute. A raw white wound traces up and up. I cannot follow it. Thank you.
Are you sending me to the podium?
I think so, yeah. Let's go through that and then get chatting.
I feel like we need a little sort of empty air between the two things.
Musical interlude.
That would be nice, but I'm not going to sing, I promise. This book, Dear Evelyn, is quite interesting to me, at any rate, in that I feel, and I often say, it's completely different to the others I've written. One reason is that it's, going back to what Paige said, it's fairly personal in its inspiration, and it's inspired by my parents' 70-year marriage. And another reason is that I've done some things in it that I wouldn't advise other people to do. I do teach creative writing. So I've told the story from the protagonist's birth virtually to his death. As I say, I wouldn't normally advise this, but I read in The Guardian recently that there is a thing called a whole life novel. So that's good. There were various challenges associated with that long time period, which I could bore you about. Maybe that'll come up in the questions. But having said that, I do realise it's actually quite similar to my other books in that right at the heart of it, there's a very complicated and contradictory character, and this has always been my interest as a writer. Characters who are deeply flawed, imperfect, who behave badly, are the kind of characters that I get excited about and want to explore. And this book is no different. Evelyn, the other protagonist, fits securely in that category. She's very charismatic in some ways, and very energetic and vital and fascinating, but she does do some bad things. Warning. So I'm going to give you two brief readings. One is from near the beginning of the story, when my two protagonists meet, and it looks, at this point, fairly propitious. Traffic choked Lavender Hill. A collision between a cyclist and a motor car brought his tram to a standstill, and Harry, already late, half ran towards the library. He normally used the main entrance, but that day, for no better reason than to get away from the main road for a moment sooner, he turned into Altenburg Gardens and arrived at the reference library entrance just as Evelyn, leaving the double doors to swing shut behind her, stepped out. She paused for a moment at the top of the three semicircular steps, framed by the white stone and the carved motto above. Non mihi, non tibi, sed nobis, which later he would translate for her. Not for me, not for you, but for us. Intended in the civic sense, he would jokingly explain. She had the type of figure that he liked best, full yet not heavy. She held herself straight and proud despite carrying several books pressed close to her body with one arm and a small leather bag in the other. Her hair, an intense brown, softly waved, fell to her shoulders. It set off a clear complexion, framed large, dark eyes and subtly rouged lips. Not a rosebud, but the opening flower itself. She took the steps as if they belonged absolutely to her, as, suddenly, did he. Was it his gaze, the sheer intensity of the attraction he felt that made her drop one of her books at the bottom of the steps? Or did she stumble slightly on the rougher brickwork there? In any case, a book slid free and landed splayed open halfway between the two of them, and he stopped and bent to pick it up, noting its author, Daphne du Maurier. He brushed the bright yellow jacket clean with his sleeve. "Is it good?" he asked as he handed it to her. He heard his own voice as from a distance. "I'll find out when I read it," she told him. "Thank you." "I'd be very interested to hear your view." He did not move aside, but occupied the space in front of her, ostensibly ignoring, yet acutely aware of a man in a tweed jacket who had also just left the library. Harry just knew, that he had been following her. Who wouldn't? Harry Miles, he said, stepping closer to Evelyn. May I carry those for you? She shrugged, but told him her name, Evelyn Hill, and handed the books over, managing to suggest by a certain coolness in the way that she thanked him that absolutely no obligation would be incurred, that indeed she was doing him a favour, which she was. South, she told him when he asked which way she was going, in the direction of Magdalen Road, and so they continued down Altenburg Gardens, the tweedy man left behind, and Harry's thirst for new writing, de rigueur for someone who felt at times that he might one day write, completely forgotten. It would be months before he read anything modern again. He noticed neat summery shoes, the faint sheen of her stockings. Her walk was brisk but stately at the same time. Magnificent, he thought, caught up in a great tide of longing that seemed almost as if it must come from outside of him. Her heels sang out on the pavement. His whole body was aware of her every step. It was, in a way, preposterous. "Do you read much?" he managed to ask. "It depends on my mood," she said, and, feeling as if everything would indeed depend on that, he forced himself to look away from her towards the houses on their left. So, this is a beginning which may perhaps suggest certain kind of story, a certain direction, which of course doesn't happen. I'm going to do perhaps a risky thing to take you from 1939, when that was, to roughly contemporary times. So not the end, as Evelyn puts it, but the beginning of the end of the book. The couple are now in their 90s, and their marriage is fairly embattled. They're not getting on at all. And this scene takes place in a hospital because Harry, the husband, has fallen over, and they've discovered not only has he dislocated his hip, but he's got pneumonia. It is the beginning of the end, she thought, and her heart started up. "We both have 'do not resuscitate' on our notes," she told the doctor, whose name she felt she could not pronounce. "You knew, of course, that this kind of thing could suddenly happen, but nothing prepared you. It was vital that they understood what you wanted, that you did not want to be a cabbage, or have someone mopping up after you for years on end while you slowly declined, 'Thank you very much,' or to do that mopping up. You wanted either to live or not." No, the doctor told her, "that's different. I don't mean to worry you unnecessarily. There is still a good chance this treatment will be successful." But looking at Harry, she doubted it. His skin papery, his cheeks hollow, his chest barely rising, the transparent plastic over his nose and mouth, the horrible whiffling of the oxygen machine, tubes going into his arm, a bag of brownish yellow liquid. Could he hear her? She asked him several times. No response, nothing at all. "Often they can hear, even when they can't speak," said the Irish nurse who came to tell her that Valerie had called the desk and was just setting out. She would be 2 hours then. "It's best to talk to him, dear, just in case." Screens divided them from other equally unresponsive patients, none of whom had anyone with them. All you could hear was their breathing, the hum of the machines. It reminded her of the terrible time, half a century ago, when she and her mother had sat in her parents' bedroom with her father while he died. Her mother had wanted her to say a nice goodbye to him, yet she could not. She was still furious with him, and the words would not come, and the smell was awful. And then, years later, with her mother, she didn't get the chance because it happened so suddenly. You never knew. She had always hated hospitals, but actually it was better here, with everything clean and people to help. "Can you hear me, Harry?" she asked again, speaking slowly and clearly. "This is Evelyn here, your wife. Valerie is on her way. You fell down. I have told them about the DNR. It's been a shock." She swallowed, studied what she could see of the face lying on the pillow. He was like someone from outer space, his skin flaking away, the bristles growing through. He hated to miss a shave. She drew in a breath, leaned closer. Look, dear, I do want you to know that I know that I've been a very lucky woman. She took a deep breath. Something in her loosened. The words had been heavy, something she had to make herself push out of her mouth, but now, suddenly, they were coming easier, as if of their own will. I remember how you propped yourself over me in the bomb shelter to protect me, how strong you were then, how you got the house built, worked in the garden, the lovely holidays we went on, how good you always were playing with the girls. And it's just a crying shame how things end up, but dear, we don't get to choose. He did not so much as move. She leaned closer. Her lips were only inches from his ear. You treasured me, she said. You were a good husband, devoted. And I never regretted saying no to Alexander Grotowski. Thank you, dear. Did you hear me, Harry? He probably didn't. It was probably a waste of time. Or perhaps a good thing. But she asked twice more, Did you hear me, Harry? And then she had to go and wash her face in the ladies. There were no paper towels. On the way out, she went left instead of right, got lost and ended up in cardiology, and one of the cleaners there had to lean her back. The Irish nurse bought her a cup of tea and a shortcake biscuit, and then Valerie arrived to take her home. 4 days later, there he was, sitting right up, alert, if noticeably thinner. He had a bit of a wheeze, but no coughing, not at all. The arguments, the fall, the ambulance, the excruciating pain when they pushed the hip back without anaesthetic because his lungs were so bad, all the things she had said to him when he lay there, apparently on the brink of death, he seemed to remember none of it. I'm sorry to have been so much trouble, he said, smiling at her, as if he had never stood in the living room and accused her of being tyrannical, never pretended not to hear what she said in return. I wonder, he asked, whether next time you come I could have my glasses and the book I was reading, and perhaps a pen and some paper and a notebook. Which book? She asked, but he could not remember the title, and when she looked on the bedside table at home, there wasn't one. Maybe she had tidied it away. What no one seemed to understand was that he was not the man she had married, not the man who had written those letters in the war or come back from it and built the house. Lillian had the letters now. The fact was that things ended. She felt suddenly very weak, sat down on the bed, put her head in her hands and sobbed until there was not a sound left in her. Stop there.
Thanks for that. I think that was maybe the most devastating part of that book for me. So,
There are a few worse things to come next.
Sure. Why don't we talk a little bit about the difficulty of writing? I think both of the readings that you just did kind of had some challenging material in them, but I also thought it might be interesting to talk a bit about the challenge of writing itself. Paige, you've said in an interview that there's maybe your favorite part of the writing process is that initial high of the idea, but then there's this kind of much more challenging process of taking those ideas and putting them into good sentences, you say. And Kathy, you sort of say, or Harry does in this book on a number of occasions, that it's difficult to find the words to write, that there seem to be too many of them and they are all trying too hard. I thought maybe both of you might like to speak to that challenge of writing and what that's like, and maybe what happens to you and what happens to the material in those challenging moments.
This is working. Everyone can hear me. It is. Sometimes I think about it as, because it's fiction, so it's not supposed to be nonfiction, but there's always inevitably personal wounds or autobiographical material, as it's called, that goes into there. I kind of keep that separate from the like pure imaginative joy of writing, but they are interlinked and they feed off each other, and one you can't really have one without the other, unfortunately. So like that pain that you're talking about is inevitable, but kind of also, for me at least, signals hopefully that like I'm doing something right, and if I feel it, maybe someone else feels it. I hope, you know. How do you feel?
Well, I'm not very good at general discussion of this topic, but I would like to talk a little bit about this particular book because it had certain challenges that I'd not encountered before. As I said, it was inspired by my own family, and in particular by a horrible coincidence of things, which was that my own parents did get very argumentative in their later years. In fact, they'd always been fairly argumentative, but it became very severe, and there was very little that was possible to do about it. It was quite distressing. And around about the same time, these love letters that were mentioned in the second reading surfaced. They were something my mum wanted to pass on to one of us, her children, and we all read them. And so in the midst of this battleground of the relationship, we were reading about its beginning in very passionate love letters. And so I found myself wanting to do something I'd not done before, which was to tell a story very close to reality, but nonetheless a fictional story. And at some point I made a decision that I would like, if possible, to use the letters in it. So I asked my father's permission. And I then found it took me years of writing to get away from the damn things. I had to somehow, because I think in the past I've been averse to writing about things that are too close to home, and written whatever fabulous stuff or very much invented storylines. So here I was confronted with this thing that I needed to somehow wrestle away from being real. And I found that once I started actually cutting and pasting the letters and getting rid of the boring bits, and then once I started writing new ones in the same voice to fit my purposes better, that something happened and I cut my moorings. Do you recognize that feeling? So I kind of cut the moorings to the inspiration for the story, and then I found myself finding those chinks in it where I could invent stuff, where things were blossoming. At the same time, and this was a peculiar challenge, which I didn't consciously set myself, but I realized halfway through I had taken on, I wasn't allowing myself to do some of the things that as a fiction writer I would normally do, to make the obvious dramatic plot moves, like the guy I mentioned in the reading, Alexander Grotowski. There were certain things you could have done with him as a novelist to create high drama and high stakes and tension, which I refused to do. So I was trying to create the storyline that was fiction, but very lifelike, I guess. So this took about 8 years. Yeah, one way and another.
Right.
Did the letters end up being fully something that you rewrote, or?
It's a mixture. So it says in the back, sometimes they're verbatim, sometimes they've been edited, sometimes they're invented. And people always ask which ones, and I'm not going to say.
It's private.
I think it undermines the book.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think both of you sort of have a really interesting relationship to what's said and what's left unsaid. And I find, Kathy, in your work, there are a lot of moments where characters seem to willingly or they sort of hold back. You tell us, the reader, what they're thinking, but they might not say it to the other characters. And I find that kind of an interesting tension. Paige, I find that some of your stories, they're laconic, they're sort of coded in this way. You're not kind of telling us straightforwardly what is happening, but there's a kind of, the implication is there, and we have to sort of spend time decoding it. So I wondered if maybe both of you would be interested in talking a little bit about that relationship between what you decide to put in and what you leave out, or how that sort of functions, what you want to say and what has to be left unsaid.
Well, I think it's very much part of the process of reading to fill stuff in. Yeah. So there are, for me, I tend to make clear what has actually happened. There's not that sort of mystery. You're not trying to grope around and think, well, what's she really done, or where is he now? I don't find that very productive, to leave readers struggling to know what's happened. But in terms of emotional intuition, I think that's one of the things that people are reading to practice, to understand why someone doesn't say something or why they only say half of it. Working with these characters that I'm drawn to, these difficult, challenging, complicated people, what I'm doing as I write is imagining my way into their reality, and my hope, of course, is that readers will too, and that jumping those gaps is part of it, very much part of it. Study after study shows that people who read novels have higher levels of empathy.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's our only excuse for doing what we do. We're like, we're helping.
Yeah, saving the world.
Yeah, those gaps, though, are... Sorry, were you doing?
No, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say that the gaps, though, are exactly what is exciting about reading. And it works on the interpersonal emotional level, but then also there's gaps in on the linguistic level too, and just any way to kind of leave little mysteries of meaning is exciting, and creates kind of a game that you're playing with the reader.
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it, don't you think? Yeah, because each writer probably establishes a relationship of some kind, or maybe not one that does forever. Maybe each piece that you're writing, you establish the kind of relationship between its teller and the hypothetical, but also very real readers. Yeah, and that's a key decision, or not normally very conscious, perhaps. Perhaps often it's done by instinct.
But I agree with you that it's not that helpful to be well, anything could be happening. It's a mystery as to what color the sky is. It's important to have a base platform established.
We were just talking about instinct, Kathy, and I don't know, and empathy, that writing, reading increases the empathy of the reader. I was wondering maybe, if we could talk about, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I guess you're both very interested in super fine details and the intimacy of getting to know those and the intimate experience of those details. And I was wondering, do you think writers in particular experience the details of everyday life in a more intense way? Or is that consistent with your own experience? And if so, do you think that's a blessing or a curse or both? I don't know if that's a funny question.
Well, I'm really not sure about that. I think people experience the details of their own lives in very intense ways. Yeah, and so as a person, I'm not sure. I can't judge really, but I wouldn't easily step into the position of saying that writers are more sensitive than everyone else. I think they're just writers. They're people who like to write, and we have the same kind of emotional lives, and the same intensity in relationship, very individual intensity and very individual things that we glom onto. I would I would say. I'm not going to make us a special case.
Fair enough.
But I may be wrong.
And maybe we're sometimes looking for these things more intensely just by virtue of needing something to write.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about them and using them, I guess. Yeah,
it's that word, it's using.
In the neutral sense of the word. My sister once said to me, this was before this book, and I was terrified that she would not like it. I did consult her halfway through. But once, about another book, she found a detail which she felt must have been taken from our family, from her. And she said, that's what you writers do, isn't it? You use people. And she was a painter, so I said, yeah, that's what you painters do. Use the world.
It seems like we kind of can't help but use the things that happen to us. It seems like regular people do that just as much as artists, but it's interesting. I think, both of you also seem to alternate kind of between intimacy and harshness, sort of gentleness and acidity. Is that an important balance that you both try to strike in your work? Is that important to you in accurately representing the subject matter or the ideas that you're exploring? I don't know if that is too odd or too general a question.
I think I just have maybe a dramatic personality.
Okay.
So like harshness and gentleness are both kind of appealing because they're both like opposite ends of this of this spectrum.
Yeah.
And like I grew up in the mountains, so like I have this like obvious things, and harshness is very obvious, and gentleness is like one of the best things in life. So I don't spend as much time as I could in the middle ground, maybe would be an accurate accusation a person could make.
Well, in terms of character, it seems to me that this is just verisimilitude, that a brutal person can also be gentle, might be on occasion, and a gentle person may be cruel.
Yeah, I think that's a rare insight. I think most people have a tendency to kind of try to file people away into one or the other extreme. This person's loving and this person is cruel. And I think there's just an interesting way that you manage to capture the internal conflicts and the internal differences of people.
Yeah, I'm really interested in, as I said, these people who don't conform to the norms of good behavior on a constant basis, and relationships that in many ways would be called dysfunctional. Because actually I think, that there are ideals, and maybe we should strive for more balance and harmony, etc., more fairness. But the reality is that life is in a constant state of flux, and most relationships are imperfect, and your therapist probably wouldn't approve of them. And so why write about anything but these difficult and flawed things? And why not see them as almost sacred, in a way? That this is what life ultimately is.
Odd.
Yeah, these imperfect situations that nonetheless we're devoted to. In my book, for a very long period of time, this relationship can be critiqued, but nonetheless it's alive. And in that sense, it matters.
Yeah.
I'm also interested in this sense of almost, this is a strong word, like becoming addicted to that kind of interest in harshness and gentleness, and in interpersonal relationships, but also in like wanting only the high notes and the low notes, and that I worry about that. I just wanted to share that.
Why does that worry you?
It's probably not a good personality trait, but
To be interested in extremes?
yeah.
I see.
But for fiction, I think it's entertaining, and like one of our jobs, besides building empathy for the world,
Saving the
is
world,
entertaining.
of course. Sure. It's interesting, Kathy, I was going to ask you if there was a sort of cynical interpretation of love in your book, but hearing you speak about that interest in complication and conflict, there seems to be a kind of hopefulness in spite of everything. Does that sound accurate to you? How do you feel about that? Do you feel hopeful or cynical with respect to love, or somewhere in between?
I'm a believer, definitely. Yeah, but I think it's a rougher thing than perhaps, as I said when I gave my first reading, looks like there is a romantic story that might ensue, and there are certain things that we might expect of it. And then as 21st century people with ideas about equality and how one should negotiate with a partner and so on and so forth, we have a whole new set of ideals about what a relationship should be. So I'm just wary of these ideals. I'm not saying they're not worth striving for, but I don't think we live up to them most of the time. So I'm interested in what we do and how much, I'm repeating myself, I think, but how much that is what our life adds up to, our relationships, good or bad. Well, they're not good and they're not bad. I think that's what I'm saying.
Bit of both, always. Paige, do you want to comment on that at all? Do you have a cynical or hopeful feeling towards love? Is that something you like exploring in your stories?
Well, as Kathy was talking, I was like, oh no.
We can move on. That's fine.
Well, I just have a lot of questions personally to talk about with my therapist. But, no, I think it's true to say that I've been writing a lot of love stories, and that is because I think it is probably fairly relatable for most people to have this fundamental question, like, am I completely unlovable? Like, am I a monster? Or am I surrounded by monsters? Or to have this like kind of strong kind of fear drive that is affecting your like interactions with societal narratives of romance or partnership. So I think I've attacked it from a couple of different angles, I hope, but it's also, I think it was Gertrude Stein who was like, oh, there's no such thing as repetition, there's only insistence. So I feel like I just keep asking that question over and over again and not getting an answer.
I think that's what we do.
I think it's really well said. Well, since we're almost out of time, I would want to try to maybe pose one last question, which is about time itself. I think both of your works bear an interesting relationship to time, not least of which, Paige, because you have a story that involves time travel. But also, Kathy, of course, as you were saying, this kind of lifelong novel idea, there's this real patience with your characters and an attempt to think through like all the things that can be promised by time and all the things that change over time. I was wondering if maybe you'd both be interested in speaking a little bit about the relationship of your work to time, or your own relationship to time, and how you try to explore that.
Well, shall I start? Yeah. This book was very interesting. I think all novels, the medium is time. That's the way I see it anyway, that in a novel you see a deed and then you see its consequence. Sometime later, it could be 3 months, it could be 100 years, it could be 200 years, or whatever. You have the option of the long view. You probably have it in the short story too, but more challenging. And so with this time period, I have to say, because I don't like long novels, So I had to find a way to negotiate through this, the 20th century, basically, in which a lot of things happened. And a lot of things happened that would impact my characters, not just wars and such, but also social change. Things in terms of the rights of women in Britain, the bringing in of free healthcare after the war, which was a huge thing. Sexual revolution, all this stuff. Which we're going through as we grow older too, massive change. And sometimes it's tempting to call it a backdrop, but it felt to me much more than a backdrop, that it was a kind of, air that, that is inevitably going to change the characters. So I had to sort of select, because there was so much choice. There's the Cold War, there's all this stuff. And then I had to find a way to take the reader on a journey that wasn't going to be. There are jumps. There are big jumps in this book. You get dumped in another decade, and you find out very quickly. I had to work out ways to orientate you so that you know where you are pretty quickly. I think you're not doing that flailing around thing that I don't think I want you doing. So I ended up with this book with a great respect for time. It's our medium.
All right, well, on that note, thanks so much for all your commentary and your great readings. And why don't we have another round of applause for Kathy and Paige, please?